Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the fifth session in the AIA in California's Fire Response Series, Wildfire Prepared Home Program, Improving Property Survivability and Insurability, a program by the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, or IBHS. As you get settled, please feel free to say hello and where you're joining from in the chat today. To qualify for continuing education credit, AIA California provides the learning objectives for every webinar and includes them in the presentation resources that can be made available online. A few quick housekeeping reminders. Today's session is being recorded and qualifies for 1.5 AIA HSW learning units. For those who stay on and watch live, AIA California staff will report these units to AIA for you and will send follow-up information on how you can request a certificate of completion. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions for today's presenters. You can also like a question to move it to the top of the queue. Please be constructive in your comments and questions to help foster a positive learning experience for everyone. We are grateful to have two fantastic speakers participating in today's session. Convinced the continuing cycle of human suffering striking families and communities following severe weather can be broken, Roy Wright leads a team of scientists and risk communicators at IBHS who deliver strategies to build safer and stronger homes and businesses. He is a property insurance expert and resiliency leader. For 2 decades, Roy has served in roles that put him on the ground in the immediate aftermath of weather-driven and climate-related disasters, walking through damaged homes with survivors and leading the charge for more survivable homes and businesses. Prior to IBHS, Roy served at FEMA as the chief executive of the National Flood Insurance Program, led the agency's Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration, and directed resilience programs addressing earthquake, fire, flood, and wind risks. We're also incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Ann Cope here today. Dr. Cope joined IBHS in 2009, just a few months before the groundbreaking for the construction of the IBHS Research Center in Richburg, South Carolina. As the chief engineer, she leads the development of research programs to improve the performance of structures in hurricanes, wildfires, severe thunderstorms, and hailstorms, as well as the team of engineers, scientists, and skilled craftsmen who conduct research on full-scale homes and commercial buildings. She is responsible for the team's implementation of research findings into building codes and standards. Prior to joining IBHS, Dr. Cope was project manager and structural engineer with Reynolds Smith and Hills Incorporated, designing projects for NASA, Department of Defense, and commercial launch operations. Dr. Cope's research encompasses topics ranging from the full-scale simulation of wind effects on buildings to detailed studies of the vulnerabilities of buildings to natural hazards and the development of damage prediction models. She is also a proud veteran of the United States Army. Wow. Thank you both so much to Roy and Dr. Cope for being with us today and sharing more about IBHS's program. And I will now hand it over to both of you.
Thank you so much. It is great to join you. Ann and I are here in South Carolina, just south of Charlotte, at the IBHS Research Center. And I'm really excited to be able to walk through and talk through these pieces with you all today. You're joining, so I want to give you a sense of IBHS. So I'll put this in motion. Our work cuts across what can happen here at the research center, as well as the kind of things that can go on in the field, always trying to see it all the way to the finish line. We're on the ground after events when we see wind just ravaging through homes during hurricanes. We're there to see the pieces about which roofs survive and which ones end up in having blue tarps there. Looking at the elements when you're trying to rebuild in Paradise, California, in ways to withstand, and then deploying into the field. We have teams out on the ground right now on the severe convective storm, literally chasing hail. We spend time out after these large catastrophes, taking what we've been able to see here at the research center to the field. Imagine, if you would, a 6-story airplane hangar. Those turbines, 105 of them, are 6 feet across. We build everything at full scale and can test up to 135-mile-an-hour winds. None of this stuff is doll houses. This is about full-scale testing that can directly simulate what Mother Nature sends our way. The kind of debris that can flow, the water that just intrudes and pervades a home, as well as a really unique set of things about how you test roofing products and siding products. We're the only place that can reproduce ember storms with variable winds, to look at structure to structure separation, to look at what it's like when two structures are one mitigated, one not, the impact of decks and how they play there on the ground. We do that work. Wind, rain, hail, and wildfire. All of that drives to this statement that says, why do you need IBHS? And we continue to see how severe weather disrupts lives and displaced families. It drives so much financial loss. And so we're a nonprofit funded by the property insurance industry that has to take our science and translate that into action, really trying to narrow those paths of destruction. For today, we're focused on the wildfire side of the equation, and Cope and I will take some turns going through these pieces and try to do it in a way that is engaging and deeply educational in terms of where the pieces go. So often, when we have these conversations about wildfire right now, the first question isn't how should my home survive? The first question is, what about my insurance? And what we have been seeing over and over is that risk has price. And price follows that risk. And so, particularly given the kind of climate changes that we have seen, we're seeing wildfires instigate and propagate into communities in more direct ways. Now, some of this is driven because there's been more fires, but I want to start here with population. We have more people in the West. We have more people living in those communities, living in harm's way. And yet the frequency and severity of the events really has accelerated. You see the timeline that is here. Many of the most destructive fires in this modern era have occurred in California. We would then look to the Marshall Fire in Colorado, as well as the Lahaina Fire in Maui. You see where they would set in that overall context. So we have seen this kind of exponential increase in the number of structures that have been destroyed by wildfire since 1990. You see the curve continue to move up. But I'll put it in context. We often talk about the billion-dollar disasters. So this is a chart many of you have probably seen in that. And you see, yes, there's been an evolution of it. You've seen the escalation of it. But it's just those little orange boxes that give you a sense of wildfire. Wildfire is small compared to the overall effect of the others. Yet, when it happens, it is absolutely catastrophic because we have seen them play out in terms of conflagration. So I said, most of the time, the questions to me start with, hey, it's about insurance, it's about insurance. And so I want to lay some foundations for us all on that insurance front about what drives price. And it really is 4 dimensions that are here: real estate value, events, inflation, as well as regulatory pieces. Let's start here with the elements on real estate values. Most Americans are pretty proud of the fact that their home equity has increased over the last decade. When they say that, hey, the value of my home went up by 50%, they're really, really proud of that. Yet, if you had a home that was at $700,000 and its value increased to $1 million, you're buying insurance to cover a greater cost that will drive your price. Yes, events and the frequency and how they're approaching communities in terms of severity and frequency affects price. Inflation. The inflationary piece of this has been really, really incredible. We had spent more than a decade setting it right around that 2%. And we had spikes during COVID, but really some prolonged pieces by which the cost to rebuild after has gone up. That reflects in your insurance premium price. And then finally, regulatory. This is particularly true in California, where Prop 103 has pervaded. There's been an artificial depression of market rates in California. And Commissioner Lauda has stepped forward and has laid out a pathway to bring health back to the insurance market. But clearly, those dimensions have affected the price. Okay, so if that's what's driving the price, well, what does insurance cost? Well, this one is really interesting to me because if you look at the national average, $2,200 a year, the lowest home insurance average in the country is in Hawaii. And the highest home insurance prices are as high as $5,400. So when we talk about, and this is all for $500,000 worth of coverage, so we've equalized on that front. But the averages vary greatly across states. And as we all know, that midpoint average doesn't tell the full story because there can be a full expanse across that curve. If you pay attention here, I'll watch and show you what these rates look like across states. Oklahoma has the highest price in the country at $5,400. That is not where people typically think of first. On an average basis, the California price, they're sitting at just about $1,500. Wide ranging pieces. So as we looked then and said, well, many of them are raising their rates, I want to look at this chart because this shows you through the summer of 24 what the average increase was that was approved in a given state for a 1-year period of time. You'll see states there in the middle of the country at 10 to 12%. You'll see pockets of 15 to 17%. And a state like Hawaii, who saw a 26% increase, yet they had the lowest average price. And so you can see that big gain that is there. I share this with you because I know that we've got folks really from across the country involved in this conversation. And while there is an acute attention on wildfire and some of the insurance issues in California, these questions about insurance really play out across the country. And it drives so much of a conversation. You know, I think for a good long time, the price of property insurance is really buried somewhere in your mortgage. And as those prices have come up, it's now become a more recognizable item, particularly at the point of new purchase, where it just really shines bright. And folks now have to make plans about how to pay for those pieces. So another dimension of insurance on the property side has been the evolution of deductibles. And deductibles have been going up for much of the last 30 years. Deductibles may have only been $1,000, just to say the homeowner retained $1,000 worth of risk. And when that was set, that was selling for many homes that may have only been worth $100,000 or $150,000. Well, the industry has made an evolution towards deductibles that are percent-based. 1%, sometimes as high as 5% deductibles, even higher in some of the hurricane-prone areas, which is to say, if you have $1 million structure, you might be personally responsible for the first $50,000 worth of loss. Folks got to calculate that into how they're managing that risk. Resilience then becomes part of the response. How can we narrow the risk? How can we pull down the risk curve? And so when we're trying to scale it, insurance pricing, including incentives or discounts that may be in place, belong in the conversation. There have been state and federal grants that is there. At this point, I think we're a little more reliant on the state grant side than the federal side. Obviously, building codes play in here. You've got to affect the building industry itself in terms of how they choose to build, as well as the choices that consumers make. So I want to paint a picture before we dive more deeply into wildfire and take you to the southeast of the country where we've seen this work. Some of you might be familiar with a program that is above code that FEMA has recognized, but IBHS has been the originator and been driving, and it is our fortified program, fortified home, commercial, and multifamily. On the fortified home, it looks at pieces beginning with the roof, looks at the openings at the silver level, and then at the gold level looks collectively at how you keep the roof on, the water out, and really reduce the damage amplifiers that would be in place there, protecting the openings against high pressures, and really dealing with the continuous load path. All of these are homes that can withstand higher winds and the kind of storms that come their way. You look specifically at the roof element of this, and it is a set of simple things that get layered on top by which there are stronger connections to keep the roof sheathing on, paying attention to water intrusion, so sealing the roof deck, sometimes just with a sealing tape across the seams, ways that we lock down the edges to keep the wind out. And in hail-prone areas, how do we defend the shingles from an impact-rated perspective? We've seen this really take hold. These simple yet strategic mitigation actions. And we've seen this play. So now that there are grant programs that have played out in a whole set of states. It started in Alabama and in North Carolina. We've seen that grow in terms of designations. There are more states that are starting to have the conversations to ramp up in that piece. We've also seen this same mindset be brought to bear on the wildfire side. So there are grant programs in place in California and Oregon, and there are a set of Western states that are looking at this, primarily focused on defensible space, but occasionally other home hardening pieces related to the envelope of the home. When we've seen these pieces activate, we have seen risk go down. And Alabama is one of the best examples of this, where the price of insurance went down and the home resale value went up. And when Hurricane Sally came through, it performed. It withstood what came its way. But back to the fundamental elements that we're about in this space. And we're going to next turn and take you through the science on it. But if I have to boil everything down to what we're trying to do, what kind of homes should we be building? What kind of business structure should we be building? We need to build for survivability and insurability. We want the structure to be able to survive the embers that we know are going to come their way, but there's a direct connection on the science side. What drives survivability also gets reflected in insurability.
So as we talk about the pieces that we have to defend against in order to make a home survive the wildfire and be insurable against the wildfire threat, three main pieces that we're looking at. Embers are what bring the fire to our neighborhoods, and then once there, they create small spot fires that result in flame ignition of the home and then radiant heat threatening the rest of the neighborhood. What that looks like in a chain, this is a chain of events put together originally by Jack Cohen way back in 2008. This is what happens when you get to something that is a suburban conflagration, wildfire that's out of control in the suburbs. It starts with an ignition source, and you've got extreme fire behavior, which we'll talk just a little bit more about in a second. But it's that number 3 spot in the chain that is really impactful, because that's where the structures ignite, and then you get many ignitions, and now you've overcome the ability of the fire resources to suppress. They are overrun, and then you have a runaway fire. This is a catastrophe when the naturally occurring fires that are in a wildland that make wildlands healthy get into our built environment and just run amok. Uncontrollable spread that we can change and defend against if we adapt to be in a state where we can actually live with the wildlands doing their thing, but our suburbs defending against that. This is not a California only problem, though many of the flames that you see on this map that are representing conflagrations from 1990 to the present, many of those are going to show up in California. It is a California dominated loss, but it's not California only. I grew up in Central Florida. I remember when I-4, the main highway across Florida, was closed because of a wildfire. We were holding our breath recently in hopes that I am not touching the clicker. Someone is touching the clicker. But we were holding our breaths that Pigeon Forge, a Pigeon Forge-like event was not going to happen again because we had the conditions that were ripe for it in the Appalachian Mountains. So it's not a California only, but certainly most of the insured losses that have occurred because of wildland fires have resulted in California problems. So when we're talking about conflagration or runaway fire, what spurs the likelihood? And then if something happens, how bad does it get? When we boil down, Roy mentioned them to you earlier, Campfire, Eaton, Palisades, Lahaina, Marshall, when we look at any and all of those wildfire events, the likelihood that something was going to happen is absolutely driven by population density. Where are all the people and how close are all the buildings? Drought. Drought was present in every single one of those events I just described. It may have been prolonged drought. It may have been flash drought. A lot of rain, a lot of vegetation, and then boom, you get a decline and that quick growing vegetation is now dead and ready to ignite. And wind. Wind is a terrible contributor because not only does it make the fire spread faster, hotter, and across more area, but it also grounds the firefighting assets, making them just sit and wait until they can deploy to suppress and to bring some sort of containment. So wind is an absolute multiplier on both fronts. Likelihood that something is going to spark and get into our neighborhoods, density, drought, wind. How bad does it get once it ignites and sparks into the neighborhood? The severity of the conflagration is also three things. The density of the structures. How closely together are the buildings within the neighborhood? Connective fuels. How much stuff is in between the structures? And when I say fuels, I mean bushes, trees, cars, boats, RVs, hot tubs. If it can burn, it is a connective fuel in between the buildings. And then third, intentionally third and not first, is what are the building materials for those structures in the neighborhood? How, as your fire chief would stand in your neighborhood driveway and say, did you harden the home? What are the pieces and parts that were chosen? The three things on severity: density of structures, connective fuels in between, and building materials. These findings weren't discovered just yesterday. They were proven again as we see fires in the near term. But the race has been on to get science to address these problems for years now. Back in 2007, we did the Witch Creek fire investigation, and we opened this facility here in the Carolinas in 2010 and started doing work to understand and characterize how wildland fires impact the built environment. We've been working steadily on that for more than 15 years. The science is catching up, and the pieces and parts that are coming out of the lab and out of post-fire investigations are now ready to have an impact on our built environment so that we can adapt and do things differently and better and not have the same type of outcomes. The research that we've done here at the lab and in the field and in the computer modeling takes on two different forms. We look at the impact of those windborne embers, and we look at the impact that flames and radiant heat make on our structures. As we look in the laboratory, and I'm a wind person, so I love that rotor that happens right there at the front of the building. We look at where, how, and how much embers accumulate around the buildings. And we see that the embers truly accumulate in what we call the zone 0, the first 5 feet. Now, the footage that's playing on the screen right now, we invited Good Morning America to come, and we had a great demonstration of all of the right things for defensible space in the half on the right, and many of the typical and poor choices on the left. You can watch the cameraman, come back and forth. He was just filming the fence. So you can see the mulch is on fire, the bush right under the deck. There's an accumulation point there for the embers. The deck is now involved. Matt Gutman, the reporter, is over there talking about it. He's very excited. And the fence, the cameraman's over there now again, looking at the fence. Because by itself, that wood fence was on fire. All by itself. This is a compelling and fascinating video to watch. And in this particular case, it was the mulch and the little bush that led to the deck that looked spectacular. And had those pieces not ignited, that wooden fence all by itself would have ignited and wicked the fire right to the structure. As we put our designation above code, beyond code pieces together, we have to incorporate a non-combustible zone right next to the structure to prevent those ignitions from happening. Here's another video where you can clearly see fire can creep through mulch or get a bush or get something right underneath the deck. If you have the non-combustible zone, as you do on the left-hand side, the fire can't get there. The outcome is starkly, compellingly different, all because of some simple details about the landscaping right next to the house. Fences, again, the one was on fire there in the GMA. Fences are often the wick within that area that brings it. The fence will light, the embers will get stuck in the fence, or the fence gets ignited. In the case of the Marshall fire, fences were ignited by grass fire and then wicked it straight to the house. The outcome is markedly different. So I've told you what we've lit on fire here in the lab, how we've done these demonstrations. What is it that we actually want people to do? What we want people to do in the defensible space and in the zone 0 is to remove the things that will burn. Those are the bushes. Those are the overhanging branches. Those are wood mulch pieces. Wood mulch right next to your building is like taking a bunch of kindling that you're getting ready to have a campfire and putting it right next to your most expensive asset, which is your house. When you say it that way, people go, oh yeah, wood mulch. Wood mulch is the thing that lights the quickest and stays on fire here at the lab the longest. So definitely the wood mulch. We want to replace the combustible fencing. The things that should be there in zone 0 are things that will not light and burn. Now, the pictures that I'm showing here on the screen are things that engineers who do not design beautiful things love. I hope that all my architecture friends out there are going, oh gosh, I could do something with that and make it more beautiful. Yes, you could. Yes, you will. I am so glad. I'm a structural engineer. I'm going to come up with the science pieces for you. And then your talents are the ones that are going to make it beautiful and also non-combustible. Oh, and the one thing that I usually get all the time with this is, but the bush is well cared for, but the bush is well watered, but the bush, yes, so was the one that we burned in the last demonstration and for Good Morning America. Watered that bush in the morning and burned it an hour later. In the conditions that we get with conflagration, the care of the bush is not a valid factor. They will all burn in those types of conditions. Next piece, roofs and gutters. Wood shake roof is particularly vulnerable because it's wood shake roof has a really tough time getting to be Class A. And even if it is Class A by thickness, if you have something below it that's going to prevent penetration into the structure, the amount of combustible material on top is going to burn. This particular roof caught fire in our laboratory all the time, even when we didn't want it to. And there's a statistical correlation between wood roofs and the ignition of 10 other buildings around them. So embers get in the gutters, they can damage the roof, they can damage the deck. For roofs and gutters, you want to have a Class A roof. You want to have non-combustible gutters, and you want to maintain them free of all the leaves and pine needles and debris that can cause those small spot fires that can take down your house. Other building features. Here's some footage from the lab. That top view is if you're in the attic space and you're watching us produce embers in a naturally occurring wind environment, they come straight into the attic. Now, I don't know about you, but I keep a lot of stuff in my attic. All of the stuff that's up there is stuff that can be easily ignited by embers. So that's something we don't want the embers getting into the house and igniting it from the inside out. The other really important building feature, and this picture from the LA Times clearly demonstrates why that bottom portion of the wall is so important. In many places in the building code, you have to have a 6-inch non-combustible piece, a vertical non-combustible piece, mostly for termite control. It's also fantastic for the prevention of the embers that are floating around in that picture from lighting siding on fire. We've also lit buildings on fire when we weren't intending to because of some vulnerability down there at the very base of the structure. So what is it that you want to actually have? For building features, you want those ember-resistant vents, and you want the 6 inches of vertical non-combustible. Great for termites, great for embers. Notice I didn't actually say flame-resistant vents. By the time you need flame resistance in the vented area, you already have something that is burning. You already have induced a threat that doesn't belong right next to the vent. Ember resistant is what is required in our standard. And we're currently in the middle of testing a lot of vents because there's some interesting things going on with the testing standards that I'd be happy to talk about later. Windows and home hardening. Double pane windows are absolutely better, and they have to stay in. In that video clip that just ran, because of the vulnerability of the frame melting in the amount of heat, the tempered pane that was on the outside fell out, providing no protection, but at least there was a second pane on the inside preventing it from getting all the way through. Tempered windows are better, dual pane. If both panes are tempered, that's even greater. And the frame material matters as well. Another vulnerability are the eaves. It's not the normal way in California to have an enclosed or soffitted eave, and it can be a vulnerability. Open eaves, particularly those that are combustible open eaves, provide the vulnerability that is shown here on the screen, where if there's a heat, it traps the heat and it can light on fire. It's a vulnerability in the California Building Code that you can have Class A by, you can achieve by penetration. So you could have wood and you could have gypsum behind it. The wood will still ignite as it did in the video. So our requirement is to have non-combustible so that the flame that you just saw doesn't occur. Cladding is also a vulnerability, even because of heat. Boom. Not because the flame actually touched it, but because of the amount of heat buildup, the cladding on the side of the structure self-ignited. And now your structure is burning. So non-combustible cladding reduces that vulnerability to heat and flame. Okay, I've talked a lot about reducing vulnerability. Reducing by how much? So with some really great work that was done recently, IBHS partnered with Zesty to look at thousands of homes over multiple fire perimeters. How much vegetation was in the first 5 feet for those that ignited and those that didn't ignite? Reducing the vegetation in the 0 to 5 doubled the property's ability to survive when inside a wildfire perimeter. And if you also do the structural pieces, you can go up to a 75% reduction in risk, shown by some work done with IBHS as well as RMS, which is now Moody's, together with the NAIC. That extends also to the outbuildings. California, there's a lot of accessory dwelling units. When those are placed in, they need to have the same mitigations as the primary structure, and they need to be far enough apart so that the structures aren't right next to each other and therefore make each other highly vulnerable. Way back in 2008, Jack Cohen showed us that when structures are 10 feet apart and one of them starts burning, the likelihood that the other one is going to burn is almost exactly 100% certainty. It's a clear yes. If this one's burning, that one's burning. He also demonstrated that 50 feet was great separation. At IBHS, we've been working to fill in the numbers in between and show the difference. Much of that is because of the wind. So I mentioned earlier, wind is devastating for 2 different reasons. It pushes the fire and it grounds the air assets. This is a demonstration of a video here at our laboratory showing you just how much it changes the way the flame from a burning structure presents itself to the rest of the neighborhood. That flame really leans over and the threat to the neighboring structure is pronounced. We've been working collaboratively with Berkeley, CAL FIRE, NIST, Maryland, going from flow, small sheds, large sheds, windy sheds, all the way up to full-size accessory dwelling units. The one that's on fire right now in the video, that is a full-scale 1-bedroom ADU. It was outfitted with appliances, clothes, furniture, so that when we burn it and then measure how it's threatening the target building that has a lot of instrumentation, that those values are scientifically accurate so that we know if it's 10 feet apart, if it's 20 feet apart, if it's 30 feet apart, how does that change the threat for the rest of the neighborhood? Our work is not done solely here in our laboratory. As I mentioned earlier, Lahaina, Marshall, Camp, Eaton, Palisades, we've gone and looked and collected data, looking at the connected fuels, looking at the building components, structural density, to map these out and understand better how our work in the lab and our observations of real-world impacts can come together for true guidance on adapting to this hazard and mitigating our way into a more resilient future. Our team was on the ground out there in LA County with CAL FIRE. And over and over and over again, the photos taken in the field are matching everything that we're seeing here in the lab. The movement of embers, the things that catch fire, the vulnerability of the building construction, time and again, fences, vents, sheds, windows. We see the same thing. The connective fuels, particularly trash cans, within those first 5 feet are allowing fire to spread from one home to another